You can't be serious.
Spencer's voice cracked as he stood in the lobby of the Crimson Rose Love Hotel, his mistress Camilla clinging to his arm. The elderly manager, Oscar Aberdeen, smiled politely from behind the reception desk. I'm afraid your wife Ginger is the new owner, Mr. Stanley. She completed the purchase this morning. Spencer's face went white as I stepped out from the manager's office, keychain dangling from my fingers. Surprise, darling, I said, my voice steady as marble. I found your receipts. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. All 47 of them. Now you can explain to Camilla why her favorite fantasy suite just became my office. The burgundy leather receipts folder sat on my kitchen counter like an accusation, its contents spread across the granite surface in a damning timeline of betrayal. Each receipt from the Crimson Rose Love Hotel told a story I'd been too naive to read until now. February 14th, Valentine's Day, while I was visiting my sick mother. March 22nd, our anniversary night, when he claimed he was working late. April 15th, the weekend. He said he was at a business conference in Denver. My hands trembled as I held the most recent receipt, dated just 3 days ago. Room 237, the Romantic Rendezvous Suite. $180 for 4 hours. The same day he'd kissed me goodbye and promised to pick up groceries on his way home from the office. Instead, he'd been paying for champagne service and silk sheets, while I'd waited for him with his favorite dinner growing cold on the stove. The coffee maker gurgled behind me, its familiar sound suddenly foreign in this new reality where my husband of 8 years had been living a double life. I'd always prided myself on being observant, on reading people and situations with the precision that made me successful in my career as a forensic accountant. Yet I'd missed the signs in my own home, in my own marriage. Spencer Stanley had been my college sweetheart, the charming business major who'd pursued me relentlessly through our senior year at Northwestern. He'd been persistent, romantic, everything I thought I wanted in a partner. When he'd proposed during graduation weekend, in front of both our families, it had felt like the perfect culmination of our college romance. Now, staring at these receipts, I realized I'd been performing in someone else's fantasy for nearly a decade. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd discovered his affair through the very skills he'd always dismissed as boring number crunching. Spencer worked in marketing for a tech startup, always talking about creativity and innovation, subtly implying that my work was mundane by comparison. You're so lucky you don't have to deal with people all day, he'd say with that patronizing smile. Just numbers and spreadsheets, so much simpler than managing clients and campaigns. But numbers don't lie, and Spencer's credit card statements had been telling a very clear story for months. The pattern was obvious once I'd started looking. Such irregular charges to the same hotel, always on days when he claimed to be elsewhere, always paid for with the credit card. I rarely monitored because I trusted him to handle his own expenses. I'd stumbled upon the receipts by accident while organizing our home office for tax season. Spencer had been uncharacteristically secretive about his filing system lately, claiming he needed to streamline his business expenses without my help. When I'd offered to organize his receipts, something I'd done every year since we'd married, he'd gotten defensive, almost angry. I can handle my own paperwork, Ginger, he'd snapped, his voice sharp in a way that made me step back. Not everything needs your professional touch. The comment had stung, but I'd attributed it to work stress. Spencer's startup had been struggling lately, and I'd assumed the pressure was getting to him. I'd even felt guilty for pushing to help, wondering if I was being too controlling, too involved in his business. But yesterday, while Spencer was at what he claimed was a client dinner, I'd found the folder tucked behind his computer monitor. My forensic instincts had kicked in immediately. Hidden financial documents were always worth investigating. What I'd found had shattered my world more thoroughly than any corporate embezzlement case I'd ever worked. The Crimson Rose Love Hotel. I'd never heard of it, but a quick online search revealed it was an upscale establishment on the other side of town, catering to couples seeking discreet romantic encounters. The website showed elegant suites with names like Midnight Passion and forbidden fantasy, complete with heart-shaped tubs and mirrors on the ceiling. Each receipt was itemized with painful precision. Room charges, champagne service, rose petal turndown, extended stay fees. The total across all 47 receipts was staggering. Over $8,000 in the past 6 months alone. Money that had come from our joint account, funding his betrayal with my own earnings. The most devastating detail was the frequency. This wasn't a one-time mistake or a moment of weakness. This was systematic, planned, budgeted for. Spencer had been living this double life with the same attention to detail he brought to his marketing campaigns, treating our marriage as just another project to be managed while he pursued his real interests elsewhere. I'd spent the entire night going through every receipt, cross-referencing them with my own calendar, with Spencer's claimed schedule, with the lies he'd told so effortlessly. The picture that emerged was of a man who'd been playing a role in our marriage while his real life happened in expensive hotel suites with someone else. My phone buzzed with a text from Spencer. "Working late again tonight. Don't wait up. Love you. Love." The word felt like a mockery now, typed casually into a phone while he was probably already planning his next visit to the Crimson Rose. I stared at the message, at the casual cruelty of it, and felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, raw and overwhelming, but underneath it was something else, something harder and more focused. I was a forensic accountant. I'd built my career on following paper trails, on uncovering deceptions, on making sure people faced consequences for their actions. Spencer had underestimated me, had treated me like a convenient cover story for his real life. He'd assumed I was too boring, too focused on numbers, too trusting to ever discover his carefully hidden secret. He was about to learn how wrong he'd been. The coffee had finished brewing, but I ignored it, my mind already racing ahead to next steps. I needed to know more about this hotel, about the woman he was seeing, about the full scope of his deception. But first, I needed to visit the scene of his betrayal myself. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, the receipts clutched in my hand like evidence in a case I was determined to solve. The Crimson Rose Love Hotel was about to receive an unexpected visitor, and Spencer Stanley's carefully constructed double life was about to come crashing down around him. The only question was how much damage I'd choose to inflict on my way out. The Crimson Rose Love Hotel sat on Elm Street like a guilty secret, its facade designed to be simultaneously elegant and discreet. From the outside, it looked like an upscale boutique hotel, with tasteful burgundy awnings and subtle lighting that suggested luxury without advertising its true purpose. I sat in my car across the street for 20 minutes, studying the building where my husband had been conducting his affair, trying to reconcile this place with the man I'd married. The parking lot was nearly empty at 2 in the afternoon, just a few expensive cars scattered across the spaces. I wondered if Spencer's silver BMW had occupied one of these spots, if he'd walked through that main entrance with another woman while I'd been at home organizing our finances and planning our future. My phone rang, jolting me from my surveillance. Spencer's name flashed on the screen, and I felt a surge of something between rage and hysteria. The audacity of him calling me while I sat outside his love nest was almost laughable. "Hey babe," his voice was warm, casual, the same tone he'd used for 8 years of marriage. "Just wanted to check in. How's your day going?" I stared at the hotel entrance, watching a young couple emerge hand in hand, both wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky. "Oh, I said, surprised by how normal my voice sounded. "Just running some errands. The usual. That's nice. Listen, I might be late again tonight. This Peterson project is really heating up, and the client wants to review the entire campaign strategy." The lie rolled off his tongue so smoothly I almost admired the craftsmanship. "Almost, of course," I replied. "Work comes first. You're the best, Ginger. I don't know what I'd do without you holding down the fort at home." Holding down the fort, like I was some kind of caretaker for his real life, maintaining the domestic facade while he pursued his actual interests elsewhere. "I'll keep dinner warm," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. After he hung up, I sat in the silence of my car, feeling something crystallize inside me. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. This was about 8 years of marriage where I'd been playing a supporting role in my own life. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story, where my dreams and goals had been gradually subordinated to his convenience. I thought about all the times I'd turned down social invitations because Spencer had plans. All the career opportunities I'd passed up because they would have required travel or late hours that might interfere with our dinner schedule. All the ways I'd made myself smaller, more convenient, more manageable to fit into his vision of what a wife should be. The forensic accountant in me began cataloging the evidence of my own diminishment. When had I stopped mentioning my work achievements? When had I started apologizing for staying late at the office? When had I begun measuring my worth by how well I supported his ambitions rather than pursuing my own? My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Avery. Coffee tomorrow. I have news about the Davidson audit contract. Avery Angelou had been my partner at our accounting firm before she'd left to start her own practice 3 years ago. She'd been trying to poach me ever since, offering partnerships and opportunities that I'd always declined because Spencer needed stability, needed me to maintain our steady income while he pursued his entrepreneurial dreams. How many times had Spencer dismissed Avery's offers with a patronizing smile? "Ginger's too risk-averse for startup life," he'd say, as if he knew me better than I knew myself. "She needs the security of a big firm, it's just her personality." But sitting outside the hotel where he'd been betraying me with clockwork regularity, I realized Spencer didn't know me at all. He knew the version of me I'd performed for his benefit, the accommodating wife who asked no inconvenient questions and made no inconvenient demands. The real me was a woman who'd graduated summa cum laude with a degree in forensic accounting. The real me had solved fraud cases worth millions of dollars, had testified in federal court, had built a reputation for tenacity and precision that made corporate executives nervous. The real me had somehow gotten lost in 8 years of marriage to a man who saw me as a convenient supporting character in his own story. I pulled out my phone and called the office, asking for an extended lunch break. Then I got out of my car and walked across the street to the Crimson Rose Love Hotel, my heels clicking against the pavement with a rhythm that sounded like determination. The lobby was surprisingly tasteful, all dark wood and burgundy leather, with soft jazz playing from hidden speakers. A distinguished older man with silver hair stood behind the reception desk, his expression professionally neutral as I approached. "Good afternoon," he said, with a slight smile. "How may I assist you?" I set the folder of receipts on the marble counter between us. "My name is Ginger Stanley," I said, watching his expression carefully. "I believe my husband has been a regular guest here." To his credit, the man's professionalism never wavered, though I caught a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "I'm Oscar Aberdeen, the manager here. I'm afraid I can't discuss specific guests due to our privacy policies." "Of course," I said, opening the folder to reveal the stack of receipts. "I'm not asking you to violate anyone's privacy. I'm simply here to understand exactly what my husband has been paying for." Oscar's eyes moved to the receipts, and I saw something shift in his expression. Sympathy, perhaps, or recognition of a situation he'd dealt with before. "Mrs. Stanley," he said quietly, "might I suggest we continue this conversation in my office?" As he led me through a door marked private, I felt the last of my illusions about my marriage crumble away. But underneath the devastation, something else was taking shape. Something harder and more focused than the grief I'd been carrying. Spencer had underestimated me, had treated our marriage like a convenience while he pursued his real desires elsewhere. He was about to discover that the quiet, accommodating wife he'd taken for granted was capable of playing a much longer, much more strategic game than he'd ever imagined. Oscar's office was a study in understated elegance, with leather-bound books lining one wall and a vintage photograph of the Chicago skyline from what looked like the 1950s hanging behind his desk. He gestured for me to take a seat in one of the burgundy wingback chairs while he settled behind his mahogany desk, the receipts spread between us like evidence in a trial. "Mrs. Stanley," he began carefully, "I've been managing this establishment for 23 years. In that time, I've learned that situations like yours are never simple, and they're never easy." I studied his face, noting the kindness in his weathered features. "How long has he been coming here?" Oscar hesitated, then pulled out a leather-bound ledger. "Your husband has been a guest since October of last year. Always the same companion. Always the same room preference when available. October." I felt my chest tighten as the timeline crystallized. That was just 2 months after we'd celebrated our 7th wedding anniversary at the lake house we'd rented upstate. The same weekend, Spencer had told me he loved me more than ever, that he couldn't imagine his life without me. I remembered that anniversary weekend with painful clarity now. We'd driven up to Lake George on a Friday afternoon, stopping at the farmer's market to buy ingredients for the elaborate dinner I'd planned. Spencer had been attentive, romantic even, carrying my bags and insisting on taking dozens of photos of us together against the backdrop of the fall foliage. "You know what I love about us," he'd said, as we'd sat on the dock that Sunday morning, our feet dangling in the cold water. "We're not like those couples who need constant drama to feel alive. We have something real, something stable." I'd leaned against his shoulder, feeling grateful for that stability, for the quiet certainty of our partnership. We'd been together since senior year at Northwestern, had built our adult lives around each other, with the methodical precision of architects designing a home meant to last forever. We'd met in Professor Davidson's advanced marketing seminar, where I'd been the only accounting major in a room full of business students. I'd enrolled in the class as an elective, curious about the intersection between financial analysis and consumer behavior. Spencer had been the star student, charming and confident, always ready with the perfect case study example, or the most innovative campaign idea. Our first conversation had been about a project analyzing the financial impact of rebranding campaigns. I'd approached him after class with questions about his presentation on Nike's evolution, and he'd been genuinely interested in my perspective on the numbers behind the marketing magic. "You see patterns that the rest of us miss," he'd said, walking me across campus toward the library. "Marketing people like me, we focus on the story, the emotion, the connection, but you understand the foundation that makes it all possible." That comment had made me feel seen in a way I'd never experienced before. My professors valued my analytical skills, my classmates respected my work ethic, but Spencer was the first person who'd made me feel like my perspective was not just useful but essential. Our study sessions became coffee dates became dinners, and by spring semester we were inseparable. Spencer would bring me his marketing projects to review, asking me to run the financial projections that would ground his creative ideas in reality. I'd share my audit case studies with him, fascinated by his ability to see the human stories behind the numbers. "We make a perfect team," he'd told me the night he'd first said he loved me, as we'd sat in his dorm room, surrounded by spreadsheets and campaign mock-ups. "You keep me honest, and I help you see the bigger picture." After graduation, we'd moved to Minneapolis together, both landing jobs at respected firms. Spencer joined a boutique marketing agency, while I started at Peterson and Associates, one of the city's most prestigious accounting firms. We'd rented a small apartment in Uptown, splitting expenses down the middle and dreaming about the life we'd build together. Those early years had been magical. We'd hosted dinner parties where Spencer would regale our friends with stories from his campaigns, while I'd quietly ensure everyone felt included and comfortable. We'd take weekend trips to explore Minnesota's lakes and forests, with Spencer planning the adventures and me handling the logistics and budgets. When Spencer had proposed on our 3rd anniversary, it had felt like the natural progression of a partnership that had been tested and proven. We'd weathered his startup's near bankruptcy, my father's cancer diagnosis, the stress of buying our first house. Through it all, we'd been a team, supporting each other through challenges and celebrating victories together. Our wedding had been small but perfect, held at the same lake where we'd had our first weekend getaway. Spencer's vows had moved me to tears. "Ginger, you're not just my wife, you're my partner in everything. You've made me a better man, a better professional, a better person. I promise to spend the rest of my life earning the gift of your love." The early years of marriage had been everything I'd hoped for. Spencer's agency had grown, partly thanks to my behind-the-scenes financial guidance. I'd been promoted to senior associate at Peterson and Associates, with Spencer cheering louder than anyone at the office celebration. We'd bought our dream house in the suburbs, adopted a golden retriever named Max, started talking seriously about children. But sitting in Oscar's office, staring at receipts that documented months of systematic betrayal, I could see how gradually things had changed. When had Spencer stopped asking for my input on his projects? When had he started dismissing my achievements as lucky breaks rather than earned successes? When had our partnership evolved into a performance where I played the supportive wife while he pursued his real interests elsewhere? Mrs. Stanley, Oscar's gentle voice brought me back to the present. Are you all right? I looked at him, this stranger who'd witnessed my husband's secret life, and felt something settle inside me. Mr. Aberdeen, I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. I'd like to know more about your business. Oscar's eyebrows rose slightly at my request, but his expression remained professionally neutral. It's an unusual question under the circumstances, he said carefully. May I ask what's prompted your interest? I traced the edge of one of Spencer's receipts with my finger, thinking about how to explain the shift happening inside me. I'm a forensic accountant, Mr. Aberdeen. When I discover financial irregularities, my first instinct isn't to get emotional, it's to understand the full scope of the situation. He nodded slowly, studying my face with what looked like growing respect. I see. Well, the Crimson Rose has been operating for 35 years. We cater to a specific clientele seeking discretion and luxury. Our business model is built on privacy, quality service, and absolute confidentiality. As he spoke, I found myself analyzing his operation with the same detachment I brought to corporate audits. The location was perfect, upscale enough to attract affluent clients, but discreet enough to avoid unwanted attention. The building itself was clearly well maintained, the staff professional and discreet. From a business perspective, it was exactly the kind of niche market that could generate substantial returns with the right management. What about the financials? I asked, surprising myself with my directness. Oscar hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Mrs. Stanley, I'm going to be frank with you because I sense you're someone who appreciates honesty. The Crimson Rose is facing some challenges. I've been running this place for over 2 decades, but I'm 73 years old. My wife passed away last year, and I'm ready to retire to Florida to be near my daughter and grandchildren. He opened a file drawer and pulled out a thick folder. The problem is finding the right buyer. This isn't a business you can simply list with a commercial realtor. It requires someone who understands both the financial aspects and the unique nature of our clientele. I felt something click into place, like a puzzle piece, finding its proper position. You're looking to sell, I am. But it's not that simple. The new owner needs to understand that this isn't just about profit margins. It's about maintaining an establishment that serves a specific purpose in people's lives. Done correctly, it's quite profitable. Done poorly, it becomes sordid. As he spoke, my mind began working through the possibilities. The location alone was worth significant money, but the existing business model, if properly managed, could be incredibly lucrative. I thought about the receipts spread on his desk. Spencer alone had spent over $8,000 in 6 months. If that was representative of their regular clientele, Mr. Aberdeen, I said slowly, would you be willing to share some general financial information? Nothing that would violate client confidentiality, but operational data that might help me understand the business model. He studied me for a long moment, then pulled out what looked like a summary sheet. Annual revenue typically runs between $800,000 and $1.2 million, depending on the season and economic conditions. Operating expenses are roughly 60% of revenue: staffing, maintenance, utilities, supplies. The profit margins are quite healthy for someone who knows how to manage the unique aspects of this business. I did quick mental calculations, my forensic accounting training kicking in automatically. With proper management and perhaps some strategic improvements, this could be a goldmine. More importantly, it would give me something Spencer could never take away: complete financial independence. There's another factor, Oscar continued, watching my expression carefully. The building itself is quite valuable. We own the property outright, no mortgage. The land alone is worth at least $400,000, and the building has been extensively renovated. Someone could certainly tear it down and develop it into something else, but that would be a waste of a profitable business. I thought about my current situation: a comfortable, but not spectacular salary at Peterson and Associates, a joint checking account that Spencer had been secretly draining for his affairs, a suburban house that would need to be sold in a divorce. The Crimson Rose represented something I'd never had before, complete control over my own financial destiny. "Mrs. Stanley," Oscar said quietly, "may I ask what you're thinking?" I looked at him directly. "I'm thinking that my husband has been funding his betrayal with our joint money. I'm thinking that he's treated our marriage like a convenience while he pursued his real interests elsewhere. And I'm thinking that there might be a certain poetic justice in turning his secret weakness into my source of strength." Oscar's eyes widened slightly, then a slow smile spread across his weathered features. "That's actually quite brilliant. It would need to be handled carefully," I continued, my mind already racing through the logistics. "I'd need to understand the legal requirements, the regulatory compliance, the staffing structure, but from a purely business perspective, this could work." "You know," Oscar said, leaning back in his chair, "in 23 years of managing this place, I've met many betrayed spouses who've discovered their partner's activities. Most are focused on revenge, exposing the affair, destroying relationships, causing maximum emotional damage. You're the first one who's seen it as a business opportunity." I smiled, feeling something shift inside me. "Emotional revenge is temporary, Mr. Aberdeen. Financial independence is forever." He nodded approvingly. "You know, Mrs. Stanley, I think you might be exactly what this place needs. Someone who understands both the numbers and the nuances. Someone who can see past the scandal to the actual business potential." "There would be conditions," I said, my forensic training demanding that I consider all angles. "I'd need complete transparency about the current financial situation. I'd need to understand the regulatory environment, the legal requirements, the tax implications, and I'd need time to secure financing. Of course. Though I should mention, I'm not necessarily looking for the highest bidder. I'm looking for the right person to carry on what I've built here. Someone who'll maintain the standards, respect the clientele, and preserve the reputation we've established." I thought about Spencer, probably at that very moment planning his next visit to this very hotel with his mistress. He'd chosen this place because it represented luxury, discretion, and services he couldn't get elsewhere. Soon, if everything went according to plan, he'd be paying those fees directly to his wife. The irony was almost too perfect to resist. Over the next 2 weeks, I began living a double life that would have made Spencer proud of the irony. During the day, I maintained my role as the dutiful wife, preparing his meals, asking about his work, pretending to believe his increasingly elaborate lies about late meetings and weekend conferences. But my evenings were spent researching hospitality law, business acquisition strategies, and the financial requirements for purchasing an existing operation. Spencer's behavior during this period only reinforced my growing determination to move forward with Oscar's proposal. The lies were becoming more frequent and more careless, as if he'd grown so comfortable with my compliance that he no longer bothered to make them believable. "I have to fly to Chicago again next weekend," he announced over dinner on a Tuesday, not even looking up from his phone as he scrolled through what I assumed were messages from his mistress. "The Peterson account is demanding more face-to-face time." I nodded sympathetically while mentally noting that Peterson was a local manufacturing company that had never required travel in the 3 years Spencer had been working with them. "That's the 3rd trip this month," I said mildly. "They must really value your input." "Well, you know how it is," Spencer replied with that self-satisfied smile I was beginning to hate. "Some clients need that personal touch. They want to feel like they're getting premium service." Premium service. I almost laughed at the unintentional accuracy of his description. According to the receipts I'd found, he'd been paying for very premium service indeed: champagne, roses, extended stay packages that cost more than most people's monthly rent. "I'm sure they appreciate your dedication," I said, taking a sip of wine to hide my expression. That weekend, while Spencer was supposedly in Chicago, I drove back to the Crimson Rose to meet with Oscar for what he'd called a comprehensive business review. He'd spent the week compiling financial records, regulatory documents, and operational procedures for my examination. The depth of information was impressive. Oscar ran his establishment with the precision of a Fortune 500 corporation, detailed expense tracking, customer satisfaction surveys, employee performance reviews, even seasonal trend analysis. Every aspect of the operation was documented, measured, and optimized. The regulatory compliance is actually quite straightforward, Oscar explained as we reviewed the licensing requirements. We're classified as a boutique hotel, with extended stay options. The state inspections are routine, and we've never had any violations or complaints. I studied the staff structure, noting the careful balance between discretion and professionalism. How do you handle employee turnover? This seems like a position where trust would be paramount. Excellent question. We pay above market rates and offer comprehensive benefits. Most of our staff have been here for years. They understand that their job security depends on absolute confidentiality and professional behavior. He pulled out another folder. Background checks are extensive, and we have strict protocols for handling sensitive situations. As we talked, I found myself increasingly impressed with the operation Oscar had built. This wasn't some seedy back alley business. It was a sophisticated service company that happened to cater to a very specific market. The profit margins were excellent, the customer base was stable and affluent, and the regulatory environment was manageable. There's one more thing you should know, Oscar said as our meeting was winding down. Your husband made a reservation for this coming Thursday. Same room, same companion as always. I felt a cold fury settle in my chest. Thursday was our 8th wedding anniversary. While I'd been planning a quiet dinner at home, Spencer had been planning to celebrate with his mistress in a hotel room. Mr. Aberdeen, I said quietly, how quickly could we complete a sale if I decided to move forward? He studied my face, clearly reading the shift in my expression. With cash and proper documentation, we could close within 30 days, faster if necessary. And would you be available to help with the transition? To ensure continuity of operations? Absolutely. I want to see this place succeed with the right owner. I'd be happy to provide whatever training and support you'd need. I made my decision in that moment, sitting in the office of a love hotel, while my husband planned to betray me on our anniversary. Mr. Aberdeen, I'd like to make an offer. His eyes lit up with what looked like genuine pleasure. I was hoping you'd say that. We spent the next hour discussing terms, financing options, and transition timelines. By the time I left the Crimson Rose that evening, we had the framework of a deal that would make me the owner of my husband's favorite destination for adultery. As I drove home, I thought about Thursday's dinner, the anniversary meal Spencer would undoubtedly skip for his hotel reservation. Let him have his celebration with his mistress. Soon enough, every dollar he spent there would be contributing to my financial independence and his ultimate humiliation. The systematic decline of our marriage had been Spencer's project. The systematic acquisition of his favorite secret was about to become mine. Thursday morning arrived with the cruel irony of perfect weather, sunny skies, and a gentle breeze that would have been ideal for the romantic anniversary celebration I'd foolishly been planning. Instead, I woke up next to a man who was already checking his phone for messages from his mistress while pretending to read work emails. "Happy anniversary, babe," Spencer said absently, not even looking up from his screen. "Sorry, but it looks like this Peterson situation is heating up again. I might need to work late tonight." I lay still for a moment, marveling at his ability to lie so casually on what should have been one of the most important days of our year. "Of course," I replied softly. "Work comes first." The rest of the morning passed in a surreal haze of domestic normalcy. Spencer showered and dressed with particular care, choosing his most expensive cologne and the shirt I'd once told him made him look handsome. Every detail of his preparation was for another woman, while I made his coffee and packed his lunch like the dutiful wife I was still pretending to be. After he left, I called my best friend Avery Angelo, needing to hear a friendly voice before the day of reckoning I had planned. "Ginger," perfect timing. Avery's warm voice came through the phone. "I was just thinking about you. How are the anniversary plans going?" I almost laughed at the question. "They've taken an unexpected turn," I said carefully. "Avery, can I ask you something? How did you know when it was time to leave Peterson and Associates and start your own practice?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That's a very specific question for anniversary morning. Is everything okay?" Avery had always been perceptive, one of the qualities that made her such a successful forensic accountant. We'd worked together for 5 years before she'd made the leap to independence, and she'd been trying to convince me to join her ever since. Let's just say I'm considering some major life changes, I said. I need to know, what gave you the courage to take that kind of financial risk? Honestly, it was realizing that the biggest risk wasn't starting my own business. It was staying somewhere that undervalued me and limiting my potential for someone else's comfort. Her voice softened. Ginger, what's really going on? I looked around our kitchen, at the carefully curated life Spencer and I had built together, and felt the last of my sentimentality dissolve. I found some irregularities in Spencer's financial records, I said, using the professional language that felt safer than admitting the personal devastation. Significant ones. Oh, honey, Avery's tone immediately shifted to protective. Do you need help, legal advice, a place to stay? Actually, I need business advice. If I were to acquire a small hospitality business, something with existing cash flow and growth potential, would you be interested in handling the accounting transition? There was another pause, longer this time. You're buying a hotel? Something like that. It's complicated, but the numbers are solid, and I think it could be very profitable with the right management. Ginger Stanley, you continue to surprise me. Yes, absolutely, I'd be interested. And when you're ready to talk about the whole story, not just the business parts, I'm here for that too. After we hung up, I felt stronger somehow. Avery's support reminded me that I had allies beyond Oscar, people who believed in my capabilities and would help me build whatever came next. The afternoon crawled by with agonizing slowness. I tried to work from home, reviewing client files and preparing reports, but my mind kept drifting to what was happening at the Crimson Rose. Spencer's reservation was for 3 p.m., checkout at 7 p.m. 4 hours of betrayal on our wedding anniversary, paid for with money from our joint account. At 6:30 my phone rang. Spencer's name appeared on the screen, and I took a deep breath before answering. Hey beautiful, his voice was slightly breathless, probably from his afternoon activities. I'm really sorry, but this Peterson emergency is going to run all night. Can we postpone our anniversary dinner until tomorrow? Of course, I said, my voice steady. These things happen. You're the best, Ginger. I really don't deserve you. For once, Spencer had said something completely accurate. After hanging up, I drove to the Crimson Rose for my scheduled evening meeting with Oscar. We'd planned to finalize the purchase agreement and discuss the transition timeline. As I pulled into the parking lot, I spotted Spencer's silver BMW in a far corner, confirmation that his Peterson emergency was exactly what I'd expected. Oscar was waiting in his office with a bottle of champagne and a folder of documents. Mrs. Stanley, he said with a genuine smile, congratulations on becoming the new owner of the Crimson Rose Love Hotel. I signed the papers with steady hands, each signature bringing me closer to financial independence and further from the woman who'd woken up that morning, still hoping to save her marriage. When Oscar handed me the keys, I felt something shift inside me, not just anger or hurt, but power. There's one more thing, Oscar said as we finished the paperwork. Your husband is currently in the Midnight Passion Suite with his companion. They requested late checkout, so they'll probably be here until around 9. I looked at my watch, 7:45 p.m. In 15 minutes, I would own the building where my husband was celebrating our anniversary with another woman. The poetic justice was almost overwhelming. Mr. Aberdeen, I said quietly. I think it's time for the new owner to make her presence known. Oscar studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Are you certain about this approach, Mrs. Stanley? Once we take this step, there's no going back to the way things were. I thought about Spencer upstairs, probably lying naked next to his mistress, both of them laughing about how easily he'd deceived his naive wife. I thought about 8 years of marriage where I'd gradually made myself smaller to accommodate his growing ego. I thought about our anniversary dinner, cold and untouched on our kitchen counter. Mr. Aberdeen, I said firmly. There was never any going back. Spencer made sure of that months ago. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a master key card. This accesses every room in the building. The Midnight Passion Suite is on the third floor, room 327. Would you like me to accompany you? I shook my head. This is something I need to do alone. But thank you for everything. You've given me more than just a business opportunity. You've given me my life back. Oscar stood and extended his hand. Mrs. Stanley, it has been my absolute pleasure. I believe the Crimson Rose is in excellent hands. As I rode the elevator to the third floor, I felt strangely calm. The rage that had sustained me through the discovery and investigation phases had crystallized into something colder and more focused. Spencer had chosen to humiliate me in private for months. Now it was time to return the favor, but with a much larger audience. The hallway was elegantly appointed with burgundy carpeting and tasteful artwork. Soft classical music played from hidden speakers, and the lighting was warm and intimate. Everything about this place screamed luxury and discretion. Exactly the kind of environment Spencer would choose for his secret life. I stood outside room 327 for a moment, listening to the muffled sounds from within. Spencer's laughter, a woman's voice I didn't recognize, the unmistakable sounds of intimacy. My husband was celebrating our 8th wedding anniversary by having sex with another woman in a hotel room that I now owned. I slid the key card into the lock and heard the soft click of the mechanism disengaging. Then I opened the door. The scene that greeted me was exactly what I'd expected, and somehow still shocking in its casual cruelty. Spencer was sprawled across the heart-shaped bed in his underwear, champagne flute in hand, while a blonde woman I didn't recognize was adjusting her bra. Rose petals were scattered across the sheets, and several empty champagne bottles sat on the nightstand. "Oh my God," the blonde woman gasped, scrambling to cover herself with the sheet. "Spencer, who is that?" Spencer's face went through a series of expressions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, horror, and finally a kind of desperate calculation as his mind raced to find an explanation that might salvage the situation. "Ginger," he stammered, sitting up so quickly he nearly fell off the bed. "What are you doing here? How did you even find this place?" I stepped into the room, leaving the door open behind me. The hallway beyond was empty, but I knew that wouldn't last long. Hotels like this had security cameras, and unusual disturbances would draw attention quickly. "Hello, Spencer," I said calmly. "I found your receipts, all 47 of them. Did you really think I wouldn't notice $8,000 missing from our joint account?" The blonde woman, she looked younger than me, maybe 25, with the kind of manufactured beauty that Spencer had always claimed didn't appeal to him, was frantically trying to gather her clothes from around the room. "Spencer, you said you were divorced," she hissed, glaring at him with sudden understanding. "You said your ex-wife was some boring accountant who lived in another state." "Camilla, please," Spencer said, his voice taking on that wheedling tone I'd learned to hate. "Let me explain. This is all just a misunderstanding. Camilla, so now I had a name to go with the face of my husband's mistress. She was even prettier than I'd imagined, with the kind of effortless elegance that came from never having to worry about paying bills or managing household finances. Actually," I said, pulling out my phone, "I think everything is quite clear. Spencer, I'd like you to meet the new owner of the Crimson Rose Love Hotel. That would be me." Spencer's face went white. "What do you mean, new owner?" "I mean I bought this place this afternoon. Every receipt you left lying around led me straight to Mr. Aberdeen, who was looking for exactly the right person to take over his business." I smiled sweetly. Turns out, being married to you was the perfect qualification. Camilla had stopped trying to dress and was staring at us both with growing horror. "Wait, you own this place? Spencer, what the hell is going on?" "Camilla, isn't it?" I said, turning to address her directly. "I'm Ginger Stanley, Spencer's wife. Not ex-wife, current wife. We celebrated our 8th wedding anniversary today. Well, I celebrated alone at home, while Spencer celebrated with you." Spencer was now fully standing, his face cycling through various shades of red and purple. "Ginger, you don't understand. This isn't what it looks like. Really? I pulled out my phone and began scrolling through the photos I'd taken of his receipts. Because it looks like you've been having a 6-month affair, using our joint money to pay for hotel rooms, champagne, and whatever other services this establishment provides. The sound of footsteps in the hallway caught my attention. Oscar appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 security guards, who looked like they'd seen this kind of situation before. "Mrs. Stanley," Oscar said formally, "is everything all right? We had reports of a disturbance." I looked at Spencer, still in his underwear, at Camilla clutching the bedsheet to her chest, at the evidence of their celebration scattered around the room, and felt a deep satisfaction settle in my chest. "Everything is perfect, Mr. Aberdeen," I said. I was just introducing myself to some of our guests and explaining the new management structure. Spencer found his voice first, though it came out as more of a croak. "Ginger, we need to talk privately. This is between us." "Private?" I laughed, the sound echoing off the mirrored ceiling. "Spencer, you forfeited privacy when you decided to celebrate our anniversary with another woman in a hotel room. Besides, I think Camilla deserves to understand exactly who she's been sleeping with." Camilla had managed to wrap herself in a silk robe, her face a mixture of humiliation and growing anger. "Spencer, you told me you were getting divorced. You showed me apartment listings, said you were moving out next month." I felt a fresh wave of betrayal wash over me. He hadn't just been having an affair, he'd been planning to leave me, stringing along both of us with different versions of his fictional future. "Spencer was moving out?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "How interesting. This is the first I'm hearing about it." Spencer's hands were shaking as he reached for his pants. "Camilla, you don't understand. The situation is complicated. My marriage has been over for years, but there are financial entanglements." "Financial entanglements," I repeated flatly. "Is that what you call a joint mortgage, shared investments, and the money I've been contributing to your startup dreams for 8 years?" Oscar cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps this conversation would be better suited for a more private venue. We do have other guests to consider." "Actually," I said, making a decision that surprised even me, "I think this is exactly where this conversation needs to happen. Spencer, you chose this room, this hotel, this moment, to betray our marriage. It seems fitting that this is where it ends." I pulled out my phone and opened my camera app. "Smile, darling. I want to document this historic moment, the day your wife became your landlord." "Ginger, don't," Spencer said, panic creeping into his voice. "You're being irrational. We can work this out." "Irrational?" I felt something snap inside me. "Spencer, I spent 3 weeks systematically investigating your lies. I researched business acquisition laws, secured financing, conducted due diligence on this property, and negotiated a purchase agreement. If that's irrational, then irrationality is significantly more effective than your rational approach to marriage." Camilla had been listening to our exchange with growing horror. "Wait, Spencer. How long have you been lying to me? When exactly were you planning to get divorced?" Spencer looked between us like a cornered animal. "Camilla, please, let me explain later. This isn't the time." "Actually," I interjected, "I think this is the perfect time. Camilla, would you like to see Spencer's calendar from last month? Because according to his work schedule, he was in client meetings during every single one of your romantic afternoons here." I pulled up the photos I'd taken of Spencer's work calendar, which I'd accessed through his laptop while he slept. "Look at this. Tuesday, March 15th, 2 p.m. to 6 p.m., marked as Peterson client presentation. But according to the hotel records Mr. Aberdeen shared with me, that's exactly when you two were enjoying the champagne service in this very room." Camilla's face was growing redder by the minute. "Spencer, you told me you'd taken vacation days for our dates. You said I was so important you were willing to use up your time off." That is, the situation evolved," Spencer stammered, clearly realizing that his web of lies was unraveling faster than he could repair it. "The situation evolved," I repeated thoughtfully. Like how our joint checking account evolved to pay for your hotel rooms, or how your business trips to Chicago evolved to include 4-hour stops at the Crimson Rose. Oscar stepped forward gently. Mrs. Stanley, if I may suggest, perhaps we could relocate this discussion to my office. I believe there are some practical matters to address regarding your husband's account status. I looked at Spencer, still fumbling with his clothes, and felt the last vestiges of my attachment to our marriage finally dissolve. Yes, let's discuss Spencer's account status. Spencer, as the new owner, I'm implementing some policy changes. First, effective immediately, this establishment no longer extends credit to guests. All services must be paid in full at the time of booking. Spencer's face went pale. What does that mean? It means your tab for today's celebration, champagne, extended stay rose petal service, late checkout, comes to $347. Cash only. I don't have that much cash on me, Spencer said weakly. How unfortunate. Mr. Aberdeen, what's our policy for guests who can't settle their accounts? Oscar's eyes twinkled with what might have been amusement. Standard procedure is to hold one form of identification until payment arrangements can be made. I smiled sweetly at Spencer. Perfect. I'll take your driver's license and your credit cards. You can retrieve them when you pay your bill. This is insane, Spencer exploded. You can't just actually I can. This is my business now, Spencer. My property, my rules. I turned to Camilla, who was watching our exchange with fascination. Camilla, I don't suppose you'd be willing to cover Spencer's tab. After all, you did enjoy the champagne. Camilla looked at Spencer with disgust. I wouldn't pay for his coffee, let alone his lies. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. Spencer, lose my number. If you ever contact me again, I'll make sure everyone at your precious startup knows exactly what kind of man you really are. As Camilla's heels clicked down the hallway, Spencer turned to me with desperation in his eyes. Ginger, please. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, work things out. You don't have to destroy everything we've built. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw him clearly, for perhaps the first time in years. The charm that had attracted me in college now looked like manipulation. The confidence I'd once admired now seemed like arrogance. The man I'd loved was either gone, or had never existed at all. Spencer, I said quietly, we didn't build anything together. You built a life for yourself, and I was just the supporting cast. The weeks following Spencer's humiliation at the Crimson Rose blurred together in a whirlwind of legal paperwork, business meetings, and the methodical dismantling of our shared life. Spencer had initially tried damage control, calling me dozens of times with increasingly desperate voicemails that ranged from angry accusations to tearful apologies to threats about what he'd do in the divorce proceedings. I'd saved every message, forwarding them to the divorce attorney Avery had recommended, a sharp woman named Arden Davidson, who specialized in high-asset divorces involving financial misconduct. Your husband is making this remarkably easy for us, she'd commented, after listening to a particularly unhinged voicemail, where Spencer accused me of stealing his business contacts and threatened to expose my vindictive behavior to everyone we know. He really doesn't understand that he has no leverage here, does he? I'd replied, reviewing the financial documents spread across her conference table. The investigation into Spencer's spending patterns had revealed far more than just the hotel receipts. With subpoena power backing my forensic accounting skills, I'd uncovered a systematic pattern of financial deception that went back almost 2 years. There were charges at expensive restaurants during my work trips, weekend getaways to luxury resorts that he'd claimed were business conferences, and most damning of all, a series of cash advances from our joint credit card that totaled nearly $15,000. Where do you think this cash went? Arden had asked, pointing to the statements. Gifts, I'd replied with certainty. Jewelry, handbags, probably rent payments for an apartment. Spencer's always been generous with other people's money when he's trying to impress someone. The investigation had also revealed Spencer's true financial situation, which was far more precarious than I'd realized. His startup, the marketing agency he'd been building for 3 years, was essentially insolvent. The major clients, he'd been boasting about were either imaginary or months behind on payments. His business partner, a college friend named Mike, had been quietly looking for an exit strategy, while Spencer continued to live as though success was just around the corner. Most revealing of all was the discovery that Spencer had been using our home as collateral for business loans I'd never agreed to. The paperwork showed my digital signature, which he'd apparently copied from tax documents without my knowledge. This constitutes fraud, Arden had said grimly. We can pursue criminal charges if you want to go that route. I'd considered it, but ultimately decided that destroying Spencer's life wasn't my goal, rebuilding my own was. Let's focus on getting me clear of all his debts and securing my ownership of the hotel. I want a clean break, not a prolonged legal battle. Meanwhile, the Crimson Rose was proving to be everything Oscar had promised and more. With Avery handling the financial transition, and me applying the same analytical skills I'd used in corporate fraud cases, we'd identified numerous opportunities for operational improvements. The customer database, when properly analyzed, revealed fascinating patterns about peak booking times, seasonal preferences, and service add-ons that generated the highest profit margins. I'd implemented a new reservation system that maximized occupancy while maintaining the discretion that clients valued most. "You're a natural at this," Oscar had said during one of our weekly transition meetings. He'd agreed to stay on as a consultant for 6 months, helping me navigate the unique challenges of the hospitality industry. "I've never seen anyone adapt to this business so quickly. It's really not that different from forensic accounting," I'd replied. "You're tracking patterns, identifying anomalies, and optimizing systems based on data. The only difference is that instead of hunting for embezzlement, I'm hunting for profit opportunities." The staff had embraced the changes with enthusiasm. I'd instituted performance bonuses tied to customer satisfaction scores, upgraded the benefits package, and most importantly, created a culture where everyone understood they were part of a legitimate business operation, not something to be ashamed of. Lance Morrison, the head of housekeeping, had been particularly supportive. "Mrs. Stanley," he'd said after a staff meeting where I'd announced profit-sharing bonuses, "in 10 years of working here, you're the first owner who's treated us like professionals instead of accessories to the rooms." But perhaps the most satisfying development had been the phone call I'd received from Mike, Spencer's business partner. "Ginger, I hope you don't mind me calling directly," he'd said nervously. "I heard about the divorce, and I wanted to reach out about the marketing agency." "What about it?" I'd asked, though I suspected I knew where this conversation was heading. "Well, Spencer's been struggling lately, missing meetings, falling behind on client work, making promises he can't keep. The Peterson account dropped us last week, and 2 other clients are threatening to leave." Mike had paused. "I know this is awkward, given your situation, but I wondered if you might be interested in discussing a consulting arrangement. Your financial analysis skills could really help us turn things around." I'd smiled, thinking about Spencer's reaction when he learned that his estranged wife was being courted by his own business partner. "Mike, I appreciate the offer, but I'm fully committed to my new venture. However, I know someone who might be perfect for what you need. Let me put you in touch with Avery Angelou." The irony was Spencer's failing business might be saved by my best friend, while I built a successful enterprise from the ashes of his betrayal. Justice had never felt so mathematically precise. That evening, as I reviewed the Crimson Rose's monthly revenue reports in my new downtown apartment, I reflected on how completely my life had changed in just 6 weeks. The woman who'd discovered those hotel receipts felt like a stranger now, someone who'd been playing a role in someone else's story for so long she'd forgotten she could write her own. 3 months into my ownership of the Crimson Rose, I discovered that Spencer's betrayal had been far more extensive than I'd initially realized. The revelation came through an unexpected source, a private investigator named Lance Angelou, Avery's brother, who'd been discreetly gathering information for our divorce proceedings. "Ginger," Lance said during a meeting in my hotel office, "I need to show you something that's going to be difficult to hear." He spread a series of photographs across my desk, images of Spencer with not just Camilla, but 2 other women over the past 18 months. There were shots of him at expensive restaurants, weekend trips to luxury resorts, and most damning of all, apartment visits to what appeared to be a second residence I'd never known about. He's been maintaining this apartment for almost 2 years, Lance explained, pointing to a lease agreement. Monthly rent of $2,800, which explains some of those cash advances you found. But that's not the worst part. He pulled out a thick folder of financial documents. Your husband has been running what amounts to a sophisticated financial fraud operation. He's been using your name and credit to secure business loans, personal credit lines, and even a second mortgage on your house, all forged signatures. I felt the blood drain from my face as I reviewed the paperwork. Spencer had essentially stolen my identity to fund not just his affairs, but an entire shadow life that I'd been unknowingly subsidizing. The total exposure is close to $180,000, Lance continued grimly. Business loans for the marketing agency, personal credit cards in your name, even a car loan for that BMW he drives. Legally, you're responsible for all of it unless we can prove fraud. Which we can, right? I asked. Though my forensic accounting experience had already shown me how difficult identity theft cases could be to prosecute. We can try. But Spencer was clever about it. He used digital signature software and had access to all your personal information. Some of these documents even show activity on your laptop and from your IP address. I stared at the evidence of my husband's systematic theft, feeling a cold rage settle in my chest. This wasn't just infidelity, this was a calculated financial assault that had put my entire future at risk. There's more, Lance said quietly. We traced the apartment lease and found that Spencer's been telling people, including the other women, that you two are already divorced. He's been actively dating and even introduced one woman to his coworkers as his new girlfriends while you were still living together. The photos showed Spencer at office parties and work events with a brunette I didn't recognize, his arm around her waist while his wedding ring sat conspicuously absent from his finger. According to the timestamps, some of these photos were taken during the same week I'd been planning our anniversary dinner. His coworkers thought you were his ex-wife, Lance explained. He's been telling people that the divorce was amicable, that you'd moved on with your lives, and were much happier now. Some of them were actually surprised to learn you two were still married. I thought about Spencer's colleagues, people I'd considered friends, who had apparently been watching him parade around with other women, while believing I was already out of the picture. The humiliation was almost unbearable, but it was the final piece of evidence that truly shattered any remaining illusion I'd had about the man I'd married. Ginger, Lance said, carefully. We found emails between Spencer and his business partner Mike, discussing the hotel receipts. They knew you'd discovered them. He handed me printed copies of email exchanges that made my blood run cold. Spencer had written to Mike. The hotel thing is handled. Ginger found some receipts, but I convinced her they were for client entertainment. She's so trusting, she actually apologized for questioning me. Mike's response was equally damning. You're playing with fire, man. What if she gets suspicious and starts digging deeper? Spencer's reply. She won't. Ginger's not the type to cause drama. She's too worried about maintaining our perfect little life to risk rocking the boat. Besides, she makes good money and doesn't ask too many questions about how I spend it. Why would I give that up? The casual cruelty of his assessment hit me like a physical blow. Spencer hadn't just been cheating on me, he'd been actively exploiting what he saw as my weaknesses, using my trust and financial stability to fund his betrayal while mocking my character to his friends. When did you receive these emails? I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. We got them through a subpoena last week. Spencer's business computer is technically company property, so Mike had to turn over all communications. I studied the timestamps on the emails. Spencer had sent them just 2 days after I'd confronted him about the first receipt I'd found. The same night he'd brought me flowers and suggested we plan a romantic getaway to reconnect. Lance, I said quietly, I want you to expand the investigation. I want to know about every loan, every credit card, every financial obligation Spencer has created in my name. I want to know about every woman, every lie, every conversation where he's discussed our marriage. Lance nodded approvingly. We can do that, but Ginger, once we start pulling those threads, there's no going back. Are you prepared for what we might find? I looked around my office, the space that had once been Oscar's domain and was now mine, filled with profit reports and business plans for a company I'd built from the ashes of my husband's betrayal. Spencer made the mistake of underestimating someone who specializes in uncovering hidden financial crimes, I said. He thought I was too weak and trusting to fight back. Let's show him exactly how wrong he was. The expanded investigation that followed Lance's discoveries became a masterclass in systematic evidence gathering. Within 2 weeks, I'd assembled what Arden Davidson called the most comprehensive financial fraud case she'd seen in 15 years of divorce law. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Camilla Davidson, Spencer's former mistress, who contacted me directly through the hotel's business line. Mrs. Stanley. Her voice was nervous but determined when I answered the phone in my office. This is Camilla. From that night at the hotel. I know this is awkward, but I need to talk to you. I felt my jaw tighten. What could we possibly have to discuss? Spencer's been calling me, texting me, even showing up at my work. He's getting desperate, and he's saying things about you that, well, I think you should know about them. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop downtown. Camilla arrived looking nothing like the confident woman I'd encountered in the hotel room. She was pale, nervous, constantly checking over her shoulder, as if she expected Spencer to appear at any moment. He's completely lost it, she said without preamble, sliding a manila envelope across the table. He's been harassing me for weeks, trying to get me to lie for him in your divorce. He wants me to say that you knew about our relationship, that you were fine with it, that you're just being vindictive now. I opened the envelope to find printed screenshots of text messages, emails, and even recorded voicemails where Spencer alternated between pleading with Camilla and threatening her. This one's from yesterday, she said, pointing to a particularly unhinged text message. He's offering me money to testify that you were emotionally abusive, that you drove him to cheat because you were controlling and manipulative. The message was even worse than she'd described. Camilla, I'll pay you $10,000 cash to tell my lawyer that Ginger knew about us and was okay with it. She's trying to destroy me out of spite. You know what she's really like, cold, calculating, more interested in money than love. Help me prove what a vindictive bitch she really is. Why are you showing me this? I asked, studying Camilla's face for any sign of deception. Because I believed him when he said you were divorced. I believed him when he said you were this awful, controlling woman who'd made his life miserable. She looked me directly in the eyes. But that night at the hotel, seeing how you handled everything with such dignity while he fell apart, I realized everything he'd told me about you was probably a lie. She pulled out another document, a lease agreement with her signature on it. He convinced me to co-sign for that apartment, said it was temporary until his divorce was finalized. Now I'm stuck with the rent payments because he's behind on everything. I studied the lease terms, my forensic training immediately spotting the problematic clauses. Camilla, this agreement makes you responsible for the full amount if Spencer defaults. You could be liable for thousands of dollars. I know. My lawyer says I'm essentially screwed unless Spencer can pay his share, which doesn't seem likely given what I'm hearing about his business. She looked at me hopefully. I was wondering, since you seem to be good at this legal stuff, maybe we could help each other. It was an unexpected alliance, but one that made perfect sense from a strategic perspective. Camilla had been victimized by Spencer's lies just as much as I had, albeit in a different way. More importantly, she had evidence of his current behavior that could be crucial for our case. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. I'll testify about everything. The lies he told me about being divorced, the forged apartment lease, the harassment since that night at the hotel. In exchange, maybe your lawyer could help me figure out how to get out of this apartment situation without destroying my credit. I considered the offer. Camilla's testimony would be devastating to Spencer's attempts to paint himself as the wronged party. Her evidence showed a pattern of deception and manipulation that went far beyond our marriage. There's something else, she said, lowering her voice. Spencer told me he's been hiding money. He said he had accounts that Ginger doesn't know about, and that he was planning to disappear everything before you could get your hands on it in the divorce. My blood ran cold. Hidden assets were every forensic accountant's nightmare in divorce proceedings, nearly impossible to recover unless you could prove they existed. Did he give you any specifics? Account numbers, bank names, anything concrete? Camilla shook her head. Not directly, but he was drunk one night and kept talking about his cryptocurrency investments and how you were too old-fashioned to understand digital assets. He said something about having Bitcoin accounts and other names that would set him up for life. Cryptocurrency. Of course, the perfect vehicle for hiding assets from both the IRS and divorce proceedings. Digital, difficult to trace, and easy to transfer to accounts under false names or even overseas exchanges. Camilla, I said, making a decision that would prove crucial to everything that followed. I think we can definitely help each other. But I need you to be prepared for what's coming. If we do this, Spencer is going to be furious. He might escalate his harassment, try to discredit both of us, even make threats. She straightened her shoulders with a resolve I hadn't expected. Mrs. Stanley, Spencer stole 8 months of my life with his lies. He made me an accessory to ruining your marriage without my knowledge. He's trying to destroy my credit and my reputation to save himself. She met my eyes with steel in her voice. I want him to face consequences for what he's done to both of us. That afternoon, I called an emergency meeting with Arden, Lance, and Avery. When I explained about Camilla's evidence and the possibility of hidden cryptocurrency assets, the room fell silent. This changes everything, Arden said finally. If we can prove Spencer's been hiding assets in digital currencies, we can pursue criminal charges for financial fraud, not just civil penalties. Lance was already making notes. I'll need to bring in a specialist in cryptocurrency forensics. It's expensive, but if he's hidden significant money, it could be worth millions depending on when he bought in. Avery looked at me with something like awe. Ginger, you've essentially built a case that could send Spencer to prison while securing everything you need for a complete financial fresh start. As we planned our next moves, I realized that Spencer's greatest mistake hadn't been underestimating my intelligence or my determination. It had been assuming that the people he'd hurt would stay silent and isolated, that we wouldn't find each other and combine our evidence into something far more powerful than the sum of its parts. He was about to learn that betrayed women, when they work together, can be absolutely devastating. The cryptocurrency forensics specialist that Lance brought in was a woman named Oscar Aberdeen, a former FBI cybercrime investigator who now worked private cases. Her reputation for tracking digital assets through the blockchain was legendary, and her fees reflected that expertise. Mrs. Stanley, she said during our first consultation, spreading printouts across the conference table in my lawyer's office. Your husband has been more active in cryptocurrency markets than most day traders. We've identified at least 7 different exchange accounts, multiple wallet addresses, and what appears to be a sophisticated laundering operation. The scope of Spencer's digital deception was staggering. Using advanced blockchain analysis software, Seeley had traced a pattern of transactions that showed Spencer had been converting our joint funds into cryptocurrency for over 2 years, then moving those assets through a series of exchanges to obscure their origin. The total value is approximately $340,000, she continued, though the exact amount fluctuates with market conditions. More importantly, he's been using identity information from multiple sources, not just yours, but also his business partner Mike and even Camilla, to create accounts. Arden Davidson looked up from her legal pad. That's multiple counts of identity theft, wire fraud, and potentially money laundering if he's been moving money internationally. He has, Seeley confirmed. Several transactions show transfers to exchanges in countries with strict financial privacy laws. He's essentially been preparing to disappear these assets entirely. I studied the transaction records, my forensic accounting training, helping me identify the patterns. He's been accelerating the transfers in the past month, I observed. Look at the frequency, almost daily conversions since I filed for divorce. That shows consciousness of guilt, Arden said grimly. He knows these assets should be part of the marital estate, and he's actively trying to hide them from the court. But it was Lance who identified the most damaging piece of evidence. Look at this, he said, pointing to a series of screenshots from Spencer's email that we'd obtained through Discovery. He's been bragging about it to Mike. The email chain was devastating. Spencer had written, "The crypto strategy is working perfectly. Even if Ginger gets half of everything in the divorce, she'll only get half of what she can find. The Bitcoin accounts are untouchable. I'll have enough to start over somewhere warm while she's stuck with the debt from the business loans. Mike's response showed he was complicit. Smart move, man. Though maybe don't put this stuff in writing. Delete this email after you read it. Spencer's reply was even more incriminating. Please, Ginger thinks cryptocurrency is fake internet money. She'll never figure out how to trace digital assets. By the time her lawyers catch up, I'll be trading from a beach in Costa Rica. The casual contempt in his assessment of my capabilities was infuriating, but strategically valuable. His own words proved that he'd been deliberately hiding marital assets while planning to flee the country. This is enough for criminal charges, Seeley said. Wire fraud alone carries up to 20 years in federal prison. Add in the identity theft and money laundering, and he's looking at serious time. What about asset recovery? I asked. Can we actually get the money back? Most of it, yes. Cryptocurrency isn't as untraceable as people think, especially when someone's been as careless about operational security as your husband. We can freeze the accounts, reverse recent transactions, and force the exchanges to cooperate with court orders. Avery had been quietly taking notes throughout the meeting. Ginger, this puts you in an incredibly strong position. Not only can we recover the hidden assets, but Spencer's criminal exposure gives us tremendous leverage in the divorce negotiations. Over the following weeks, we developed what Arden called the most comprehensive financial warfare strategy she'd ever implemented. The plan had multiple phases, each designed to systematically dismantle Spencer's attempts to escape the consequences of his actions. Phase 1 involved quietly filing criminal complaints with both federal and state authorities. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit was particularly interested in the cryptocurrency laundering scheme, while local prosecutors wanted to pursue the identity theft charges. Phase 2 focused on asset preservation. Seeley worked with international law enforcement to freeze Spencer's cryptocurrency accounts before he could transfer them to untraceable wallets. Meanwhile, Lance coordinated with private security firms to monitor Spencer's activities and prevent him from fleeing the country. Phase 3 was the divorce strategy itself. Arden planned to present Spencer with a choice: accept a settlement that left him with minimal assets but no criminal charges, or face federal prosecution that could result in decades in prison and complete forfeiture of all hidden assets. The beauty of this approach, Arden explained, is that we're not just seeking revenge. We're systematically recovering everything he stole while ensuring he can't hurt anyone else the same way. But the most satisfying element of our strategy was the role that Camilla would play. Her testimony about Spencer's admissions regarding hidden assets would be crucial for the criminal case, but she'd also agreed to something even more devastating. Spencer's been begging me to meet him, she told me during one of our planning sessions. He thinks he can convince me to lie for him in court. What if I agree to meet him, but record the conversation? The idea was brilliant. If Spencer tried to suborn perjury, or admit to hiding assets while trying to convince Camilla to lie, we'd have him on tape committing additional crimes, while inadvertently confessing to the ones we were already pursuing. Are you sure you're comfortable with this? I asked. It could be dangerous if Spencer realizes what's happening. Camilla's jaw was set with determination. Mrs. Stanley, that man convinced me to destroy your marriage, steal my own financial security, and participate in his lies for months. I want him to face every possible consequence for what he's done. As we finalized the details of our comprehensive plan, I reflected on how completely the tables had turned. Spencer had spent months treating me like a naive, trusting wife who could be easily manipulated and deceived. Soon he would discover that his biggest mistake wasn't underestimating my intelligence. It was leaving such a detailed trail of evidence that even a first-year law student could have built a case against him. The woman who'd found those hotel receipts 6 months ago would never have imagined she was capable of orchestrating such a methodical destruction of someone who'd betrayed her. But then again, that woman had never owned her own business, commanded a team of forensic specialists, or discovered the intoxicating power of turning someone's own weapons against them. Spencer wanted to play games with financial deception and emotional manipulation, Unfortunately for him, he'd chosen to play against someone who was very, very good at winning. The meeting between Camilla and Spencer was scheduled for a quiet restaurant downtown, chosen specifically because it had excellent acoustics for recording and multiple exit routes if things went wrong. Camilla wore a wire provided by Lance's security team, while I monitored the conversation from a van parked across the street, listening through high-quality headphones as my husband walked straight into our trap. Spencer arrived 15 minutes late, looking haggard and desperate. The confident man I'd married had been replaced by someone who clearly hadn't been sleeping well. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his usually perfect hair unkempt, and there was a nervous energy in his movements that suggested he was running on caffeine and panic. "Camilla, thank God you agreed to meet me." His voice came through the wire, tinged with relief and desperation. "I've been going crazy. You're the only person who can help me get through this." "Spencer, you look terrible," Camilla replied, her voice carefully neutral. "What's so urgent that you couldn't discuss it over the phone?" "It's about Ginger and this whole divorce mess. She's trying to destroy me, Camilla. She's making up lies about hidden assets, bringing up things that have nothing to do with our marriage. I need you to tell the truth about our relationship." I leaned forward in the van, my pulse quickening. Spencer was already walking into territory that could incriminate him further. "What kind of truth?" Camilla asked, following the script we'd rehearsed. "That you knew I was married, that our relationship was just casual, that Ginger knew about us and was fine with it because our marriage was already over in everything but name." The audacity was breathtaking. Spencer was asking Camilla to perjure herself by claiming I'd known about their affair, which would undermine my claims of betrayal and financial deception. "Spencer, that's not what happened and you know it," Camilla said, her voice growing cooler. "You told me you were divorced. You showed me apartment listings, talked about your new life. I never would have gotten involved if I'd known you were still married." "Look, I know I simplified the situation," Spencer said, his voice taking on that wheedling tone I'd learned to hate. "But the marriage was dead, Camilla. We were just going through the motions. I was trying to protect you from the drama of a messy divorce. By lying to me for months, it wasn't lying, it was protecting you. And now I need you to protect me. Ginger's lawyers are claiming I hid money from her, that I committed fraud. But you know that's not true. You know I'm not that kind of person." I almost laughed out loud. Spencer was about to confess to exactly the crimes we suspected him of while trying to convince Camilla he was innocent. "What money are they talking about?" Camilla asked, staying perfectly on script. Spencer's voice dropped to a whisper, which our sophisticated recording equipment picked up clearly. "She's claiming I have cryptocurrency accounts she doesn't know about, which is ridiculous. Those investments were made with my own money, money I earned before we were married." Lance, sitting beside me in the van, raised his eyebrows. Spencer had just lied about the source of the cryptocurrency funds while inadvertently confirming their existence. "Spencer," Camilla continued, "when you told me about having money set aside for our future together, was that the same money?" "What I told you was," Spencer was clearly realizing he'd painted himself into a corner. "Look, the details don't matter. What matters is that you tell the court that our relationship was consensual, that you knew the situation, and that Ginger's just being vindictive." "What if I don't want to lie in court?" Spencer's voice hardened. "Camilla, you signed that apartment lease. You're financially tied to me whether you like it or not. If I go down in this divorce, if Ginger gets everything, how do you think you're going to pay that rent?" There it was. A clear threat. Spencer was essentially admitting that he'd deliberately entangled Camilla financially to ensure her compliance with his lies. "Are you threatening me?" Camilla asked, genuine anger creeping into her voice. "I'm explaining reality. We're in this together now. I took care of you for months. Expensive dinners, weekend trips, gifts. The least you can do is help me when I need it." "You mean the gifts you bought with money you stole from your wife?" Spencer's voice exploded with frustration. "I didn't steal anything. That money was mine too. Just because we had joint accounts doesn't mean she owned every dollar. I earned that money, I invested it, and now she's trying to take half of everything I worked for." Lance was frantically taking notes, documenting every admission Spencer was making. The conversation was going even better than we'd hoped. "Spencer," Camilla said quietly, "I think I need to tell you something. Ginger's been very kind to me. She helped me understand the apartment lease situation, and her lawyer is going to help me get out of it without destroying my credit." The silence on the other end was deafening. When Spencer finally spoke, his voice was completely different, cold and calculating in a way that made my skin crawl. "You've been talking to Ginger." "Yes. What did you tell her?" "The truth. About the lies you told me, about the apartment, about the things you said about having money she couldn't find." "Camilla, you have no idea what you've done. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Ginger might seem sweet and helpful now, but she's vindictive. She's trying to destroy me out of spite, and if you help her, you'll be next." "Is that another threat?" "It's a warning. Cross her, and she'll find a way to ruin your life too. That's the kind of person she really is underneath all that fake kindness." I listened to Spencer's assessment of my character with fascination. Even now, caught in his own web of lies and facing the consequences of his betrayal, he couldn't accept responsibility. I was the villain in his story, the vindictive ex-wife who was unreasonably punishing him for what he saw as minor infractions. "Spencer," Camilla said, her voice steady and clear, "I think we're done here." "Camilla, wait, please. I'll pay you, cash. $10,000 to testify that the relationship was consensual, and that you knew I was married. $20,000 if you say Ginger knew about us." And there it was. Attempted bribery to commit perjury, recorded in crystal clear audio. Spencer had just handed us enough evidence to put him away for years while simultaneously proving that everything we'd accused him of was true. The federal agents arrived at Spencer's apartment at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, armed with warrants for his arrest and the seizure of all his electronic devices. I wasn't there to witness it, but Lance's contacts in law enforcement provided a detailed account that was almost too satisfying to believe. Spencer had apparently answered the door in his underwear, clearly expecting a food delivery, rather than the FBI. When Agent Morrison held up his badge and announced they had warrants for wire fraud, identity theft, and attempted witness tampering, Spencer's first words were reportedly, "This is all my wife's fault." Even facing federal agents, Spencer couldn't accept responsibility for his own actions. The real confrontation I'd been waiting for came 3 hours later, when Spencer's lawyer managed to get him released on bail. By then, the news of his arrest had spread through his professional network like wildfire. His business partner Mike had already issued a statement distancing the marketing agency from Spencer's personal legal troubles, and 2 of their remaining clients had canceled their contracts that morning. Spencer came directly to the Crimson Rose. I was in my office reviewing quarterly projections when Oscar, who'd remained as a part-time consultant, knocked on my door with an expression somewhere between amusement and concern. "Mrs. Stanley," he said quietly, "your husband is in the lobby. He's agitated and demanding to see you." I looked up from my financial reports, feeling strangely calm. "Is he alone?" "Yes, though he's making quite a scene." Should I call security? I considered the options. Spencer was probably desperate enough to do something stupid, but he was also facing federal charges that would only get worse if he added harassment or trespassing to his growing list of crimes. No, I decided. Send him up. But have Lance's security team standing by, just in case. 5 minutes later, Spencer burst through my office door without knocking, his face red with fury and what looked like the lingering effects of a sleepless night. The confident businessman I'd married was completely gone, replaced by someone who looked unhinged and desperate. "You vindictive bitch," he snarled, slamming the door behind him. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I set down my pen and looked at him with the same calm expression I'd used to review a problematic audit. "Hello, Spencer. I assume you're referring to the federal charges?" "Yes, I'm aware of them. Quite an impressive list: wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering, attempted bribery of a witness. Did I miss anything?" "You recorded me," he shouted, beginning to pace the small office like a caged animal. "You had that slut, Camilla, wear a wire and record a private conversation. That slut was the woman you convinced to co-sign fraudulent leases while lying about being divorced," I replied calmly. "And yes, we recorded you attempting to bribe her into committing perjury. It seemed like the responsible thing to do, given your demonstrated pattern of criminal behavior." Spencer stopped pacing and stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. What happened to you? You used to be sweet, supportive, understanding. Now you're this cold, calculating monster. I laughed, a sound that seemed to startle him. Spencer, I'm exactly who I've always been, a forensic accountant who specializes in uncovering financial crimes. The only difference is that now I'm using those skills on you instead of for you. For me, I never asked you to subsidize your affairs, to ignore your lies, to turn a blind eye while you stole my identity and used it to fund your double life. I stood up, walking around my desk to face him directly. You're right, you never asked. You just assumed I was too stupid and trusting to figure it out. Spencer's face was cycling through emotions, rage, desperation, and something that might have been genuine confusion. We could have worked this out privately. Divorce mediation, splitting things fairly. But you had to destroy everything, didn't you? Fairly? I felt my calm facade slip slightly. Spencer, you stole $340,000 in cryptocurrency using my identity. You mortgaged our house without my knowledge. You've been maintaining a secret apartment and conducting multiple affairs for over 2 years. Exactly which part of that represents fair in your mind? I was going to split the crypto with you eventually. I was trying to build something for our future. Our future. Spencer, you were planning to disappear to Costa Rica with digital assets you'd stolen from our marriage. Your own emails prove it. The mention of his emails seemed to deflate him slightly. Spencer slumped into the chair across from my desk, suddenly looking older and more defeated. How did you find all of this? He asked quietly. How did you even know where to look? I sat back down, studying the man I'd once loved. Spencer, I've been a forensic accountant for 12 years. I've tracked down hidden assets worth millions of dollars, uncovered complex money laundering schemes, and testified in federal court against people who thought they were smarter than the system. Did you really think I wouldn't notice $8,000 missing from our joint account? But you never seemed interested in that stuff at home. You always said you wanted to keep work and personal life separate. Because I trusted you, I said simply. I never investigated our finances, because I believed you were honest with me. The moment I found those hotel receipts, everything changed. Spencer looked around my office, at the business plans spread across my desk, the profit charts on the walls, the evidence of the successful enterprise I'd built from the ruins of his betrayal. So this is it? He asked. You destroy my life and build your empire on top of the wreckage. Spencer, I said, my voice gentle for the first time since he'd entered my office. I didn't destroy your life. You did that yourself, one lie at a time, one theft at a time, one betrayal at a time. I just documented it. He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. Perhaps for the first time in our relationship, Spencer was actually seeing me clearly, not as the supportive wife he'd taken for granted, but as the intelligent, capable woman who'd systematically dismantled his carefully constructed web of deception. I never meant for it to go this far, he said finally. I know, I replied. That's the problem. You never thought about consequences, never considered that your actions might hurt other people. You just did whatever felt good in the moment, and assumed you could charm your way out of any trouble. Spencer stood up slowly, looking around my office one last time. So what happens now? Now you face the consequences of your choices. The federal prosecutors are offering a plea deal, 5 years in prison in exchange for full restitution and cooperation with asset recovery. Your lawyer probably told you about it this morning. And if I don't take the deal, and met his eyes directly, then you go to trial, where Camilla and I and a dozen other witnesses testify about your crimes, and you face up to 25 years in federal prison. Your choice. As Spencer walked toward the door, he turned back one last time. Do you hate me? I considered the question seriously. No, Spencer. I don't hate you. But I don't love you anymore either. You're just irrelevant to my life, now. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and I returned to my quarterly projections. There was still work to do. The plea hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in federal court, and I had every intention of being there to witness Spencer accept responsibility for his crimes. What I hadn't expected was for the courtroom to be packed with familiar faces, Spencer's colleagues, former clients, and even some of our mutual friends who'd apparently been following the case through local news coverage. Spencer's arrest had made headlines in the business section of the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, local marketing executive charged in cryptocurrency fraud scheme. The article detailed not just the financial crimes, but also the unusual circumstances of how his wife had purchased the hotel where he'd been conducting his affairs. The reporter had clearly done her homework, painting a picture of systematic deception that made Spencer look like a complete fool. I sat in the second row, flanked by Avery and Camilla, watching as Spencer shuffled into the courtroom in a rumpled suit with his lawyer beside him. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past month, his hair graying at the temples and his face gaunt from what I assumed were sleepless nights. The federal prosecutor, a sharp woman named Elena Morrison, had prepared a comprehensive statement that laid out the full scope of Spencer's crimes. As she spoke, I watched the faces of people in the courtroom: Spencer's former business partner Mike, several clients who'd trusted him with their marketing campaigns, even his own parents who'd flown in from Phoenix. "Your Honor," Prosecutor Morrison began, "the defendant engaged in a systematic pattern of financial fraud that extended over 2 years and involved multiple victims. He used stolen identity information to create cryptocurrency accounts, forged signatures on loan documents, and attempted to bribe witnesses to lie under oath about his crimes." She pulled out a thick folder of evidence. The defendant's own recorded statements show a callous disregard for the law and the rights of others. When attempting to convince a witness to commit perjury, he stated, and I quote, "Ginger thinks cryptocurrency is fake internet money. She'll never figure out how to trace digital assets." A murmur went through the courtroom. Spencer's underestimation of my capabilities had become a central theme in the prosecution's case, and hearing it read aloud in federal court was almost poetic. The defendant's criminal activities were discovered when his wife, a forensic accountant, found hotel receipts documenting his extramarital affair. Her subsequent investigation revealed the full extent of his financial crimes. Morrison gestured toward me. Mrs. Stanley's professional expertise enabled her to uncover evidence that the defendant had assumed would remain hidden forever. Judge Davidson, no relation to my divorce attorney, but an equally sharp woman, reviewed the plea agreement with careful attention. "Mr. Stanley, do you understand that by accepting this plea, you're admitting guilt to charges that carry a maximum sentence of 25 years in federal prison?" Spencer's voice was barely audible. "Yes, Your Honor. And do you understand that you're agreeing to pay full restitution of $340,000 in cryptocurrency assets, plus additional damages for identity theft and fraud?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Mr. Stanley, I want you to look at me directly." Judge Davidson's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Do you take full responsibility for these crimes, without reservation or excuse?" Spencer lifted his head, and for a moment his eyes found mine across the courtroom. I saw something in his expression that might have been genuine remorse, or perhaps just the recognition that his carefully constructed world had finally collapsed completely. "Yes, Your Honor, I take full responsibility." The judge accepted the plea agreement, sentencing Spencer to 4 years in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation. As the gavel fell, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice had been served, but it was still the end of what had once been the most important relationship in my life. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered around the steps, eager for statements from the key players in what had become a local scandal. I'd prepared for this moment, knowing that my response would likely be quoted in follow-up articles. "Mrs. Stanley," called out the Minneapolis Star-Tribune reporter who'd been covering the case, "how do you feel about your husband's sentence?" I paused at the top of the courthouse steps, looking back at the building where Spencer's fate had been sealed. "I feel that justice has been served. Mr. Stanley made choices that harmed multiple people, and he's now facing the consequences of those choices. What about your role in uncovering his crimes? Some people are calling you a hero for exposing financial fraud." I considered the question carefully. "I'm not a hero, I'm a forensic accountant who discovered that her personal life had become a crime scene. I simply applied the same professional standards to my marriage that I'd always applied to my work." "What's next for you and the Crimson Rose?" This question I was happy to answer. The Crimson Rose is thriving under new management. We've expanded our services, improved our facilities, and maintained the highest standards of discretion and professionalism. We're proof that sometimes the best revenge is building something better from the ashes of betrayal. As I walked down the courthouse steps, I spotted Mike, Spencer's former business partner, waiting by the curb. He approached cautiously, clearly uncertain of his reception. "Ginger," he said nervously, "I wanted to apologize. I had no idea Spencer was doing anything illegal with your money." "If I'd known, Mike," I interrupted gently, "Spencer's crimes weren't your responsibility. But his lies did cost you your business, didn't they?" He nodded miserably. "We lost the rest of our clients after his arrest. I'm having to shut everything down and file for bankruptcy." I pulled out my business card, the new one that read Ginger Stanley, CEO, Crimson Rose Hospitality Group. "Call me next week. I'm expanding my business operations, and I might have a position for someone with your marketing expertise." Mike stared at the card in amazement. You'd hire me? After everything?" "Spencer deceived both of us, Mike. The difference is that you didn't know about his crimes, and you tried to distance yourself once you learned the truth. That shows integrity." I smiled. "Besides, I believe in second chances, just not third ones." As I drove away from the courthouse, I reflected on how completely my life had changed in less than a year. The woman who'd discovered those hotel receipts had been playing a supporting role in someone else's story. The woman driving away from Spencer's sentencing was the author of her own narrative, and it was turning out to be quite an adventure. 2 weeks after Spencer's sentencing, I received an unexpected visitor at the Crimson Rose. Camilla arrived during the lunch hour, looking professional in a navy blazer, and carrying what appeared to be a portfolio. "Ginger," she said, extending her hand formally, "thank you for agreeing to see me. I know this is unusual, but I have a business proposition." I gestured for her to take a seat in my office, curious about what could have brought Spencer's former mistress to my door with a business plan. "I've been thinking about our conversation months ago, when you said that emotional revenge is temporary, but financial independence is forever," she began, opening her portfolio. "You were right. Spencer's prosecution gave me closure, but it didn't give me a future." She spread several documents across my desk: business licenses, marketing plans, and what looked like financial projections. "I want to open a boutique consulting firm specializing in helping women navigate financial recovery after divorce or betrayal. I have a master's degree in psychology and 3 years of experience in crisis counseling. After what Spencer put us both through, I realized there's a real need for this kind of specialized service." I studied her materials, impressed by the thoroughness of her planning. "This is actually quite well thought out. What made you decide on this particular niche?" "Because I spent 8 months believing I was in love with a man who was systematically lying to me about everything that mattered. And you spent 8 years married to someone who was stealing your identity and your future." Camilla met my eyes directly. "We can't be the only women who've been through this kind of elaborate financial and emotional manipulation." She was right. The divorce attorney Arden Davidson had mentioned several times that cases like mine were becoming more common: sophisticated financial fraud disguised as marital problems. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked. "A partnership. You have the business expertise and the resources. I have the psychological training and a deep understanding of what it feels like to be victimized by financial deception. Together, we could create something that helps other women rebuild their lives after betrayal." I leaned back in my chair, considering the proposition. It was audacious in its simplicity, turning our shared experience with Spencer's manipulation into a business that could help other women avoid or recover from similar situations. "There's something poetic about it," I admitted. "Spencer's crimes bringing together two of his victims to create something that could help other women recognize and fight back against similar abuse." Camilla smiled, for the first time since entering my office. "I've already spoken with Arden Davidson about the legal aspects, and she's interested in referring clients who need this kind of specialized support. She says most divorce attorneys aren't equipped to handle the psychological component of financial fraud cases, and the business model, individual counseling, group therapy sessions, and intensive weekend retreats, plus consulting services for attorneys who need help understanding the psychological tactics used by financial abusers." She pulled out a detailed budget. I've calculated that we could be profitable within 18 months with proper startup funding. I found myself genuinely excited by the idea. The Crimson Rose had taught me that there was tremendous satisfaction in building something meaningful from the ashes of betrayal. This new venture could have an even greater impact. Camilla, I said finally, I think this could work, but I have one condition. What's that? We call it the Phoenix Project. Because sometimes the best revenge is rising from the ashes stronger than you were before. Camilla's eyes lit up. I love it. The Phoenix Project. Helping women rebuild their lives after financial betrayal. As we shook hands on our new partnership, I thought about Spencer, probably sitting in his federal prison cell wondering how his life had gone so wrong. He'd never understand that his greatest mistake wasn't just underestimating one woman. It was creating the circumstances that would bring together two women who were determined to make sure no one else would suffer the same fate. The irony was perfect. Spencer's betrayal had not only destroyed his own life but had inadvertently created the foundation for helping other women protect themselves from men exactly like him. 3 years later, I stood in the lobby of the Crimson Rose's newest location in downtown Chicago, watching our grand opening reception unfold with quiet satisfaction. The Phoenix Project had exceeded every projection, helping over 200 women navigate financial recovery while generating enough revenue to fund this expansion. The original Crimson Rose in Minneapolis had become the flagship of what was now a small but profitable hospitality empire. The Chicago location maintained the same elegance and discretion, but with updated amenities and a more modern aesthetic. Mrs. Stanley, a young woman, approached, extending her business card. I'm Sarah Chen from the Chicago Tribune. I was hoping to get a quote about your expansion plans. I accepted her card with a smile. The Crimson Rose Hospitality Group is committed to providing exceptional service while maintaining the highest standards of discretion. We're not just in the hospitality business, we're in the business of creating safe spaces for people to be themselves. As the reporter walked away, Avery appeared at my elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. Look at you, giving interviews like a seasoned CEO. Remember when you were afraid to speak up in staff meetings? I laughed, accepting the champagne. That woman feels like someone I knew in another lifetime. Across the room, I spotted Camilla leading a small group of women through the lobby, explaining the Phoenix Project's services to potential clients. Her confidence had grown tremendously over the past 3 years, transforming her from Spencer's victim into one of the most respected financial recovery counselors in the Midwest. Any regrets? Avery asked, following my gaze. I considered the question seriously. About Spencer? About the marriage? No. That experience taught me who I really was underneath all the accommodating behavior. It turns out I'm much stronger and more capable than I ever imagined. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment my heart stopped. It was from Spencer. After 3 years of silence, seeing his name on my screen felt surreal. The message was brief. Saw the Tribune article about your Chicago expansion. Congratulations. You built something amazing from the worst day of both our lives. I'm proud of you, and I'm sorry it took losing everything for me to realize what I had. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Spencer belonged to my past, and tonight was about celebrating my future. Everything okay? Avery asked, noticing my expression. Perfect, I replied, raising my champagne glass. Absolutely perfect. As the evening wound down and the last guest departed, I stood alone in my beautiful new hotel lobby, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The woman who'd found those hotel receipts could never have imagined she'd end up owning multiple successful businesses, helping other women rebuild their lives, and most importantly, discovering her own strength. Spencer had been right about one thing. I had built something amazing from the worst day of both our lives. The difference was that I'd built it for myself, on my own terms with my own vision, and that made all the difference in the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.